Welcome back to Rising from the Shadows, the podcast where we explore the journey of healing from trauma, reclaiming power, and thriving beyond the shadows of our past. I am your host, Marlon, and today I am thrilled to bring you another powerful conversation. My guest today is Robin Tamura. He's a courage and self-leadership coach, yoga teacher, and you're gonna have to tell me more about this shakuhachi player based in Berlin. After falling ill with hyperthyroidism in his mid 20s, he shifted from a career in video game animation to helping others cultivate courage, self trust, and inner leadership through Heartworks, IFS. Love that. Mindfulness and systemic coaching techniques. He guides people in transforming fear and self doubt into deeper connection with their true self. Uh, Welcome to the show, Robin.
Thank you, Marlon. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So, majority of our guests um, tend to have stories dealing from healing from narcissistic abuse. That is not your story today, but I thought it was important to talk to you because in some of my previous episodes, I talk about how someone falls prey to a narcissist, and it's really your sense of self. It's you lacking your sense of self. And that's something that begins, usually your family of origin, your early friendships, your early relationships that starts to strip you of your sense of self. So while we're not talking about healing from narcissistic abuse today, I think it's so important that we have this conversation about regaining that sense of self because, of course, that's your guiding compass. Um, so the floor is yours to begin with. Just share with me your story in any fashion you'd like to take it.
Sure, thank you. Well, I think I do have some history of abuse, actually. So there was a lot of emotional abuse going on in my family. And that very much led me, me being like a very sensitive, sort of creative, introverted kid, just led me to just sort of retreat into myself and just be in my own world. And I didn't really want to have anything to do with the world out there, just because, my own family seemed such a dangerous environment already. Like, how
Yeah.
bad would the world out there be? So, and that's also probably why I ended up being in video games, just because video games were safe, and they were fun and they were interesting, and I liked the idea of just being creative and creating art for video games. So I started doing that after school. And still, even though it kind of was my passion at the time, there was still like an underlying sense of just like, I'm worthless, or I have to become something. There's something wrong with me, or even like, oh, like it's a crime for me to exist almost. Like I have to pay, almost like I have to pay bail or something.
Oh,
You know,
Can
for
I
for
can I
actual.
pause right there? What you said is so. I mean, I can totally relate that phrase that it's like it's a crime for you to exist, and you have to pay something into the world to do so. What do you attribute you having that type of internal dialogue to specifically? Were there words said to you specifically that made you feel like, oh, wow, yes, I am ugly?
I think. mm, Not necessarily like directly in the sense of like you are worthless. More of a sense of, oh, okay, I'm being a burden.
Okay.
I'm being a burden to my parents or my father specifically, and also just realizing that somehow like there's so much unhappiness in the family going on, and somehow thinking that as a kid you always think everything is your
It's your
fault,
fault. Yeah.
you know, and then just feeling like, oh my God, like, people are just keep blowing up, there's just like, this like verbal abuse going on and stuff like that. And just all of that, you just gather and put the pieces together, and you just realize, like if I was truly welcome in this world, it wouldn't be like this. Yeah. So I think it's more sort of the energy that you pick up, and just a sense of like me being here is actually seems to be a bit of a problem rather than something beautiful, something to celebrate.
If you're comfortable, can you share some of that family dynamic? You said there was so much um, anger or unhappiness, I think was what you said, in your house growing up. What in your mind were the stressors or the triggers that were kind of brought all this unhappiness to the surface? And like the verbal abuse from your father, or however the adults in your family were interacting.
Um, it's hard to sort of put it down, and to some extent, this is like my parents' business. But I think it's a combination of, for one thing, like cultural differences. Like my father is from Japan, and there are some similarities between German and Japanese culture, but also some things that are very different. And just Japanese culture has this thing of you are expected to do so much for other people and to also anticipate
Mm.
other people's needs and wants so much. And whereas German culture is much more sort of you just sort of come out with whatever you want. And that doesn't always go well together. And added that to that, just the fact that I always felt like sort of uh, basically, I think my father was just traumatized
Yeah.
from and just like, and this probably comes down basically just generational trauma going all the way back to the
Mhm.
war, you know and just like being raised in a like by a very very unloving mother and stuff like that. And mm, so I think it comes down to a lack of love and to making a lot of fear-based decisions. I think my father made a lot of decisions that, like, he sort of thought he was doing it for the good of the family, but ultimately they made him very unhappy. And so and that just translated into lots and lots of anger, and added to that with a tendency to just think that I have it all figured out and I'm the one who's always right.
Yeah.
That does not lead to you actually getting looking at what's going on underneath the surface, and starting to work on that. When it just ends up in just bouts of rage and stuff like that.
Now, in your case, was it only emotional, or was there physical as well?
No physical abuse, no, no.
And the reason why I asked that is, um, I feel as if there is more sympathy given to people who can physically bear the scars of their trauma. Like it makes sense, right? Like if you are, beat bloody, like, oh wow, yes, you're being mistreated. Or if you come up with bruises and things like that at school, like anybody can look at that and say, oh, there's something here we need to look into. But the emotional thing, in my opinion, is more damaging because of how many excuses people make for perpetrators because it's invisible. Like, oh, everybody, no, they're old school. Everybody, everybody loses their cool sometimes or what have you. Um,
Hmm.
which is very interesting because when you think, I don't know what was the case with you, but for my father, uh, he very much knew how to act in public. He wasn't flying off the handle in public and beating us up at church and stuff like that. He knew how to control himself. He knew what was appropriate to behave out in public versus at home. Um, so I always call bullshit on their old school, their this and that, because they know when their shame kicks in, they know, like, I shouldn't be doing this and I'm not going to, wait until you get home. That's the reason
Hmm.
why there's no wait until you get home. And I just think it's so important that we talk about the emotional implications of all of this because, man, not only does that leave the scar from the abuser, at least a scar from the people that excuse and enable the abuser. Um, and also the scar of you validating yourself, right? Because like everybody else is saying like this is either normal or not as bad, so maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm too
Mm.
sensitive. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I need a total down. Like everybody's right, I'm wrong. Um, and in my case, that's kind of like split me from my sense of self, like that part. Um,
Hmm.
so
Definitely.
okay,
And and you don't know any different, right?
right,
Growing up as a kid, you kind of assume that, okay, like, this is just how it is. And with the life that I've built now, with the friends and the connections that I have now, I realizing that, wow, you know, life is actually supposed to be
yeah.
different.
And not everybody grows up this way,
Yes, that too.
right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there was a bit of time where I wasn't the most jovial dinner guest, right? Because I had stories that people were like, "What the hell?" Because nobody around me grew up like that. I come from, my parents are Haitian immigrants, so I very much, grew up not in America, in America. You
Mm.
understand what I mean? It was just like a full different culture in the home, which was very much still driven by like um very paternalistic domineering culture that my
Mm.
parents were from. Um I have a theory about that there comes a time in everybody's life where no matter how long you've been beaten down, little tiny voice just like starts talking to you and saying like there's something wrong with this or like I don't deserve this or what have you. And then it's kind of up to us to figure out how we're going to uh, like break that cycle. Was there a moment for you? And if yes, what was the pivotal moment when you realized you had to make a change um, and leave maybe relationships behind, leave your old ways behind to find healing? And what was that moment for you?
Mm. So for me, I remember this moment very distinctly. It was around my mid-20s when I had just finished like my bachelor's thesis, doing some animation, and I was doing exactly what I've been wanting to be doing, and but I didn't really enjoy it because like all of this time, like I was working under so much pressure. It was like my entire self-worth depends on me being good at this. And by the end of it, like, so I finished it in time and everything was fine. But the time was so stressful that I had developed this case of hyperthyroidism, which for people like, which is when your thyroid just goes haywire and starts overproducing hormones, which means that you're constantly nervous, you're constantly on edge, you're shaky and stuff like that. And so I was actually physically sick. And but also mentally, I just realized that, wow, I'm in a really dark place. I'm angry at everybody. And I remember there was this one moment when it just, that thought hit me that, okay, if I don't change something, if I don't do something about this, this is just going to kill me eventually. No, this is going to drag me down into a dark hole that I won't get out of. And that's where I really also then realizing that, okay, and I need to get help in order to do that. And luckily, throughout my life, I've always been surrounded by a lot of great people who were able to offer really good help. And um, I remember, because I was always very, very, just very fearful, very anxious. And I got into spirituality and martial arts and stuff like that because I wanted to know, how can I be free from fear? And I was reading a lot of stuff, but I never really got an answer. And then after having that moment, I remember like I was talking to my mother and she recommended me this book. I forgot who wrote it, but it was called Beyond Willpower. And there was this one line in there, which just was so eye-opening to me, which was that, whenever there's some kind of psycholo- psychological problem, it usually stems from some kind of fear. And that fear comes from a lack of love. So, and basically, there it was. There it was the answer to, okay, how can I be free from fear? Well, love is the opposite of fear. So that's what you have to ground yourself in. That's what you have to find. That's what you have to cultivate for yourself and for others. And yeah,
Tell us
basically,
more about that because I'm hearing you talk about that and it feels intuitively like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Um, you put more love in your life, whether it's platonically or romantically, but like healthy love, those parts of you like fill up, right? Like it totally makes sense. And I'm just thinking about um like my path trying to find the answers was like so different. Like my focus was on um um power dynamics. Like how can someone who doesn't have positional power empower themselves? That was like my
mm,
thought. I was like trying to figure it out. Um and so it was a very like analytical thing that again continued to separate me from my inner self because I was just like, this is a math problem, like that I need to figure out versus like, Marlon, you weren't loved. You don't know what that feels like. So you think any type of attention is love or any type of praise that's love when you is some breadcrumbing is love, it's good enough. Uh, I never filled up my tank in love.
mhm.
That's so interesting. Uh, were you able then to take like the path into filling your tank up that way?
Yeah. And now then it's a question of how spiritual do you want to get? But
Listen, I'm very, I have my own belief system, but I think it's very interesting to have people, because hopefully people of all different walks of life tune in and hear these stories. And some people very much connect with spirituality, whether it's through tarot, whether it's through a Christian faith or Buddhism or what have you. So I think whatever helps someone connect to themselves and to sense of a higher power, um, let's talk about it.
sure. So for me, it comes down to, because you said like, okay, you're filling up that tank of love. And the way I think about it, and I come at this from a sort of more, what you would call a non-duality kind of perspective, which is the idea that, there is no separation in truth. There's just oneness. And what we call love is actually our experiencing of that oneness. That feeling of being in connection, being somehow part of just like a perfect whole that embraces everything. And love. Well, usually when we grow up and we learn about love, we tend to think about romantic love, maybe parental love, love for your siblings. But love comes in all kinds of different um, shapes. It's you have love for your friends, but you also have love for what you do, for your work, for nature, all sorts of things. Whenever you feel connected to something, whenever you feel that something is lighting you up, that is actually you feeling who you are. That's what actually you being connected to your essence, which is something that goes beyond your understanding of what you would call your ego or your
Okay,
separate
you got to say that again
finite
because
mind.
uh, that's so impactful that like all these things that we're experiencing, we're experiencing ourselves. It's not really
Yeah.
an exterior thing. That
Mhm.
is, yeah, that makes sense to me. Um, in some of the other conversations I have, especially with the narcissistic abuse survivors, like myself, um, what comes up is that all the projecting of goodness that I did was things that I loved about myself, like the intellectual curiosity and thirst for life. It wasn't them, it was me. Those were my qualities. The generosity, those were my qualities. Um, and I just, I guess, expected that if this is the way I am, that's how people are. Other people are cool. Other people are generous. Other people, care, stuff like that. Um, and all this time, I didn't realize they were things about me, and I was looking externally for an indication that I was all those things that I'm seeing in this other person when it wasn't in that person at all. Um, so please say that again about how we experience things, and what light us up and like what that means about us.
Well, basically, okay, if we take the assumption that, okay, like separation is not real, then whenever I see, take romantic love, for example, because that's usually in relationships, for example, okay, let's say I fall in love with somebody, and that person makes me feel like, I belong here, like I'm not only okay, I'm amazing, I feel all of this love that seems to come to me from this person. And then time goes by and everything goes to hell. And then you're super sad. And it's like, where did all the love go? Love is a lie. And the thing is that it's not the love that was the lie. What was the illusion is just the impression that it came from the outside, the impression that it came from a different person, when only that person was basically just a mirror that
Yeah,
reflected who you truly are, that reflected your innermost truth. And they happened to be a particularly good mirror for you at the time. But then things just change. And then, shards of the mirror just go on to become something else. And then people think, oh no, where did the love go? It's all, and well, it didn't go anywhere. It's always there. It's literally always there. It's literally all there is. It's inside you. And I think connecting, knowing that this is your essence, knowing that this is who you are, is actually what heals and what makes you become alive and what makes you become whole and to find your purpose. And all of these things come from knowing who you are, on the deepest level.
that is so, well, that is amazing. My spiritual practice, I mean, I grew up very um, fundamentalist, evangelical, Christian in America. Um, and I left all of that behind. And unbeknownst to me, my spiritual practice became journaling. Um, I have journals from like 2006. And so I remember when I was getting back into myself, what did I do? I started making a list of like things that I liked, you know. On one of the lists was the blueberry pancakes. I love blueberry pancakes. Just like making it's actually on my phone now. It's on a note. It says self inventory, uh, and just writing it out, all the things that I love about myself. I love dancing. I love cooking. I love exploring. I love art. I love music. You know, I love things of beauty. I love my cigars and my whiskey. All these things that I feel like so me when I'm doing it or when I'm being it. Um, that was in a way me experiencing all of that, internal stuff that I never verbalized or articulated. Um, and so it's interesting how your spiritual practice and my spiritual practice of simply journaling kind of brought us to the same conclusion.
Mm. Yeah, I think there are so many different paths to just finding the truth, if you will. And then, as many paths as there are people. And
Yeah.
yeah, and they're all valid. It's like all the religions, in my opinion, all of the different spiritual systems, like from Buddhism to yoga and all these kinds of things, even Christianity. Um, they all point at the same thing and wrap it up in different, in different cultural customs and stuff like that. But, when you boil it down to the essence, you're right, I would say.
Who am I? What is the meaning of my place in the world? So where am I going?
Yeah, basically the answer to that.
Right.
Yes. And
It's
the
so
answer
interesting.
to all that, it's the same answer to all of those questions, the same answer.
Yeah. Do we have time to get into that? What's the answer?
And you are love, you come from love, and you're going to love. Basically, that's all.
You are love. You come from love, and you're going to live.
Yeah. There's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to be. The only thing that changes is your perception, the way you look at yourself, and the way you look at the world. And especially when you work in therapy or coaching, you really get to see that. You really get to see, when you're doing that kind of inner work, when somebody starts taking off their glasses, their fear and anger and pain glasses, and all of a sudden the world looks completely different. They were living in a dismal place like a few minutes ago, and all of a sudden there's possibility, there's freedom, there's opportunity. There are lots of things to live for. So it really is all in here. That's
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Because one of the most important things about me reclaiming my power was starting to trust my intuition and coming to terms that trusting my intuition has nothing to do with my intuition being quote unquote right. It's just that I have an internal compass, and who would I rather listen to, that compass or something external? Um, we talk about perfectionism, right? And usually it's just start, just do it. Oh, and um, which is great, like that. I understand that concept. I also think of perfectionism in not listening to your intuition because you're afraid that of being wrong, right? You need to have a something clear cut that your intuition is right. Well, everybody around you is wrong. And until you have that answer, you don't listen to yourself.
Really.
And that was a level of perfectionism that, that I fell prey to because I've always been a self-starter. I'm a huge risk taker. I've always been bold, massive shifts forward. That's just my personality. But when it came to my inner self, I was still had this weird, I may not know what's best for me. It's possible that someone else knows what's best for me. Um, and so I had to reclaim that back and just come to terms with, um, I know what's best for me. And just because I know what's best for me doesn't mean I'm going to get it right all the time. But by God, I'm going to listen to myself. I'm going to trust myself because myself is growing, myself is evolving, um, and only me can care for me more than anything else. Um, Something that got me to that, IFS. I started doing IFS, internal family systems, with my therapist. Can you talk to us a little bit about IFS and, kind of the concept behind it?
Sure. So IFS is talked about internal family systems, and it's a form of what is called parts work therapy. And the basic idea is that your mind is not just made up of one personality, but actually a whole bunch of sub personalities or parts. And this is actually something that's completely common. You have, everybody's talking about their inner critic.
Mhm.
A lot of people are talking about, their inner child. And we all have this experience of either than, when I'm in this context with my friends, I'm a slightly different person than when I'm with my boss, So different situations bring up different parts of us. And we also all know the experience of having an argument with ourselves, being in
Right.
conflict with ourselves. So one part of us wants this, but the other part wants that, or is really, really scared of that, and we can keep running in a loop and just fighting with ourselves for hours on end. So this is actually something that's completely, it's not so outlandish when you think about it. And what we do in IFS is that but basically, the amazing thing is that when you have a part like that, you know, let's say you have an inner critic who's really, really being harsh on, on you. Basically, you're always being harsh on yourself. You can basically invite this inner critic to just come and sit down with you
Mhm.
and ask him, "Hey, man, you're always being very harsh. Like, what's going on? Why do you why do you feel the need to always be so harsh? Is there something that you're afraid might happen if you weren't being so harsh all the time?" So we
And this
try
is heavy
to,
stuff. This is heavy stuff. Like, I know when, we have a session and, I know what my therapist says, what does little Marlon want to tell you right now? I'm like, I got to cancel my afternoon. No, because it's really crazy how these parts of you come up and will tell you what they need or hear. And it's not always pretty, I had been in some form of therapy since I was probably 18, 19 years old, whether it was a group thing, psychoanalytic or some type of thing. And I had never had so much progress until I started doing IFS.
yeah, yeah, that's my experience too. It's a very, very powerful method.
What do you think that is? Are you an analytical person by nature?
Um, I have a very, very pronounced analytical part also, definitely. I've become very good at also just having that guy chill out, but I can be very,
I'm
very
not good yet.
analytical too.
I'm not-
I'm not always good at it, just to be. Um, I think, well, for one thing, I think it is the attitude that we bring to IFS, because we always assume that all parts of us, no matter how cruel or pathetic or destructive they may seem, have a good intention
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
All of our parts are only trying to help. Even the violent,
Mhm.
hateful, most just evil parts, if you will, like they all, at the end of the day, they all just want to help. And when we get to know them, we actually see that they're really like, they're like children
Yeah.
who had to start, fending for their lives at an age when they weren't supposed to, and where they were just completely overwhelmed with,
Yeah.
the things that they had to deal with. So of course they come up with less than ideal strategies, and they're working really hard. And often to them, it's like life and death. If I'm scared that my partner abandons me, and so I shout at them, that part of me that's shouting is so scared of being abandoned, and that part probably thinks that, oh God, if she leaves me, I'm going to die because I'm still a child, and if I'm alone, then I'm going to
Which might
die.
I
That's
might
the
add,
reality.
is age appropriate when you're a kid, right? Like all those protective things, it's age appropriate when you're a kid because you can't take care of yourself. It's when you're an
Absolutely.
adult, right? That's when it's like, okay, we got to find some new systems to kind of navigate the world, uh, because we never grow out of those protective habits, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Mm. So coming back, like, why is IFS so powerful? It's that attitude of just being, of being really appreciative of everything that comes up. We're accepting everything. We're not trying to push anything away, but we know that everything, is valuable. Everything, the problems that we have today are the solutions to problems in the past. And these solutions need to be honored, and they need to be seen in what they're trying
Mhm.
to accomplish for us in their good intentions. And when we do that, at the end, it's all of a sudden things start to transform without us having to try to fix something, or to be persuasive. All of these things don't work. What works is just holding space, witnessing, appreciating, having compassion, and just and seeing things as they are, and identifying the needs that are in that are behind. what we're experiencing, the behaviors that we're displaying.
I want your thoughts on this. I am not a professional academic or anything on this, right? I'm a lay person. I have a theory that there is only one thing that anyone ever needs to work on to find like complete wholeness with themselves. And that's just fighting shame. What are your thoughts on that? Because I even think like the opposite of love is not hate. I think it's shame. Shame makes us change who we are to fit in someone else's reality. Shame makes us choose things that are not authentic with us. Shame makes us feel bad because of these protective parts that took care of us as kids are coming up now as adults and like we shouldn't feel that way or that was bad or what have you. Uh, it seems to me that it all boils down to shame.
Ooh. Um, I think there's some truth to that. So, well, basically, what shame does, because the message of shame is basically there's something wrong with me, right? So, and the message of love is that this is right. When I feel love, when I feel my own love, just I know that somehow, this is right. Me existing here is right. And shame in a way negates that by saying, there's something wrong with me. And so in that sense, it can be sort of weaponized into controlling people and to really cutting people off from their self-worth and weakening them and by that cutting them off from their love, definitely. I think there are other things that do that too, fear and things like that, guilt, which is quite similar to shame. But I think you're right in that shame is is probably one of the most, if not the most uncomfortable, like painful feeling that we can have. Because it has that element of just like, I am wrong.
Yeah.
And there's something just like existential about that hits very, very close to home.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that's just my experience because I can completely attest to when I started embracing my shame and just uh ooh, I I felt so completely empowered because I wasn't letting what people dictates that, should be shameful for me. I'm like, that's not my shame. That's your shame. That's not my shame today. Like it's not my shame that, that I asked for a divorce. That's not my shame that I did this or did that. It's not my shame that I stood up for myself. That's for you to, And when I tell you that, when I just really uh, uh, accepted the parts of me that were the the kindest parts of me, which in the beginning it didn't feel that way, right? Because it was going against somebody else's agenda, right? Going against somebody else's expectations that fulfilled their needs without ever reciprocating. So it felt shameful for me to like stand up for myself. Like
Mhm.
how dare you bring this up? Like how dare you ask for this? How dare you be upset that you're being mistreated? How dare you? Like you're not a good person for feeling this way. You should just take what you're getting, and that's good enough. Like how dare you? How dare you be um, discontent? You know,
Mm.
and boy, that was just like all of this welling shame that uh, like you said in the beginning, but I just wasn't worthy of of anything, of good, um, yeah, it just wasn't worthy. And I still deal with so that's with shame about stuff, but sometimes I feel uncomfortable with the level of confidence I have now. Because I don't know if taught is the right word, but I think our society isn't comfortable with confident people. Our society isn't comfortable with people that don't change their personality to make other people comfortable, or people that fully move into self-love and say like, like if somebody gives you um, um for example, public speaking. I've always been good at public speaking. I love public speaking. And I can remember when people would give me a compliment after giving a speech, I would feel so, kind of like, oh yeah, yeah, I'm glad it went over well. I didn't practice it the night before, blah, blah. When I knew I killed, right? And so um, I had to practice saying things like, thank you. That means a lot. I worked very hard on that, you know?
Mhm.
And it was me getting rid of the shame of being like, I don't deserve recognition. I don't deserve celebration. I don't deserve love or being, you know, um, accepted and all of this stuff. Uh, it was definitely shame driven, and what I'm fighting most right now is being okay with being like my higher self in public.
Yeah.
Being my higher self outside of my journey.
Mm. Yeah. 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 And what an amazing transformation that is, isn't it? Like what an amazing problem to have,
Right.
just like
I love that. What an
yeah.
amazing problem to have. What an
But
amazing.
I very much relate to that. It's a similar thing, and especially people like us, who have been sort of conditioned to think that there's virtue in making ourselves small.
Mhm.
You know that breaking out of that mindset is tricky, but very much necessary. Like the world doesn't need people who make themselves small, especially not people who have genuine depth, who have sensitivities, who have
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
an understanding of trauma and how to get out. We need these kinds of people at their strongest. We need these people to shine and show themselves and speak up. So getting over that shame is super important, not just for ourselves, but also just for the world
Yeah.
we're trying to create.
Yeah. It creates such a I guess testimony for other people like, oh, I can do it too. Like I can do it and still be around and live and still have good relationships and fulfill. Um, I tell a story in the keynote that I give about uh, how I liken uh, all the courage, all the self-worth that I have now. I thought it was just like a kind of like a sudden thing that happened after like, the light bulb went off. But I realized over my life, there were certain times that I was strong. And, it wasn't like consistent, but just like this situation I was strong, that situation I was strong, this one I stood up, this one I did this. And I liken it to like putting a deposit, uh, you know, putting your pennies into like a little deposit and then it grows, it grows. And now, I have a whole bunch to draw on. When you look back at your life, even when you felt the lowest up until now, can you identify times, in the darkest moments where there were little deposits that you put into the bank of love that all to culminate into, the self-actualization that you may be experiencing now? Were there little deposits along the way that you can identify?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I definitely do think so. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like we have a way of just finding ways of making our truth come to the surface. And for me, it was art when I was a kid, and writing,
Amen.
writing stories, drawing, things like that, or even like being at the theater club. So being creative, and I think I could feel a lot of appreciation coming towards me for these things, and also yeah, there are different things. I signed up at a like martial arts school when I was 10, and I trained there for like over 10 years, and just going through that, having that experience, and I had a really great teacher, by the way. He really was really good at teaching people the value that hard work pays off. And now that I'm still benefiting, I think, from what I learned there. not in terms of being able to fight or something, but just from in terms of, being able to of discipline and dedication and all these kinds of things. So when I look back, it's kind of like everything sort of seems kind of laid out. Even though I was given this huge package to carry, this huge, not to unravel, that thing. But I was also given, the means and the support to find my way out of it.
Wow, that's powerful. Uh, I think about this all the time, and you talking about your artwork and creativity. Uh, I was like, oh, I never thought about that for myself. There were other things like moments that stick out in my mind that I felt were like building up. Um, I'm not a drawer, painter, or anything like that, but boy, can I create something out of nothing. I used to make my own toys, um, I used to with poster board. I would make like theater outfits. I remember my brother and I we wanted to play Roman soldiers. So I literally made armor, like Roman legionnaire armor out of poster board. I made like helicopters, like Black Hawks and tanks and like all the out of poster board. Um, the church that I grew up with had a really small insular group that didn't have a program for children. So me and my best friend Othniel, we came together. I made a magazine. I made a magazine, a monthly magazine. There was like word search in there, little stories in there, crosswords, like a whole thing that I released every month on Microsoft Publisher 97. Um, and now I'm thinking about my life now and how my creativity has always made me believe that there was something possible. Like I don't have the answer now, but there's something possible, and I'm gonna figure it out. I just have to keep doing making something. I have on my board in my office, um, it's CCR, and it stands for create. Was it create? What was the other C? It was like oh, Marlon. What was the other C? It was about, oh yeah, create, connect, and then rest. If I do those three things, that was like my formula for just
Mm.
like a really good, like I need to create, I need to connect with other people,
Mhm.
just for that social part and something that somebody will randomly say, I'm like, oh, I was working on this or what have you. And that just triggered, like, that was the answer. So I need to create, I need to connect. And then, boy, do I need a rest because I can go at a million miles an hour. And I find that's like when I'm in balance. Um, and it came from like my childhood to now, like that. I think that was my secret sauce doing that. So it's so interesting that you said that. That really put into perspective, I guess, part of the gift that I was given that I was even focusing on until literally just right now.
There's this saying that you become a true grown up when you start creating out of yourself. When you start to actually become the creator of your life, when you start not to just, look on the outside and do something with that, but actually just look what's inside of me and create from that, create something that's completely new, but that's coming from you. And like you said, that ability is when you come to trust just in that, I'm a creative spirit. And that doesn't mean that you have to be drawing or anything. There's many, many ways to be creative. So many ways, but just like knowing that, by nature is creative. And so whatever life gives to me, I can do something. I can respond to that. I can create something good to myself, for myself and others. I think that's very important, especially if you're doing something that's entrepreneurial or something like that, because you have to be so creative.
100%. Let's talk relationships. Navigating relationships post trauma. Um, it's been my experience that healing kind of forces us to reevaluate the people in our lives. Um, what were some of the biggest shifts in your relationships as you healed, and how did you approach setting boundaries to protect, the path you were on, protect your peace?
Um, I think, yeah, there is this phenomenon of outgrowing people, and as you sort of enter a different stage of development, if you will, just you're going to need input and connection with different people, and there might be some people in your circle, in from your peers who are making similar shifts and they stick with you. And there are some people who just who are not, and then just the connection gets weaker, just because there's nothing to be done there. It's like a different frequency.
There's
So
nothing to be
definitely true
done.
for me. Well, when I had this big shift in my mid-20s, I had been with my ex-girlfriend like for 6 years, and then I just knew, like, I have to end this. Not because there's anything wrong with her, not because she did anything wrong or something like that, but just because I am somebody different now, and I just know I need to expand. I need to go somewhere new, and I think it's really important to allow that. Uh, yeah, and just realize that there are certain connections. There are some connections that might be with you for the rest of your life, but there are certain connections that just have, they're with you for a period of time. They are companions for a certain part of the way. And then at some point, the roads just fork, where somebody stays where they are and you keep going. Yeah, this.
I can attest to that specifically in terms with, um, I served in the United States Marine Corps for 8 years. I really do not have any close relationships with anyone I served with at this point. And I had some really, really close friends. And I knew some really, really, I used to say, the best people I know, um, were Marines, and the worst people I know were Marines. I did have some really great relationships. Um, and I think it was meant for that time in my life. When I got out of the military, um, and started kind of like breaking away from, um, kind of like the nationalistic, patriotic, like mindset, and seeing the world kind of like as a bigger entity than just good guys, bad guys, or what have you. Yeah, like I didn't have any breakup calls with anyone. It just naturally shifted away. I still am like connected to some, on Facebook and Instagram, and I see them, um, wearing their hats, wearing their jackets, going, drinking on the Marine Corps birthday and stuff like that, and do year after year. I mean, I'm 37. It's um, you know, they're still so deep into that identity, and it just wasn't me anymore. And so that shifted. And again, no malice, no ill will. Like some of like I can think of a handful of people right now. Like, man, these are solid guys, just really, really solid guys. I had this one friend, DJ. We couldn't be any more different. I'm from outside of Philly. He's this loud Boston guy that, kind of like a troublemaker, you know, um, but he has such a good heart. Oh my God. He probably was the most genuine people that I've ever met. Now his life habits were not conducive to life habits. Um, but I could trust his heart. I could trust his heart. Um, And, but we just kind of drifted based on what we were trying to pursue in life, how much more we wanted to, elevate. And it's just so interesting that you say that, uh, because I know that setting boundaries and outgrowing relationships, it really can sometimes feel like an act of betrayal, especially if some of these people that really helped you out in some like low parts in your life. And so sometimes feels like a betrayal to like step away or move forward. Um, how do you navigate kind of the emotional push and pull of enforcing those boundaries or just like staying on your path when you have those feelings of betrayal?
I mean, relationships are not easy, and sort of the closer you get, the more complicated it gets. So I think at the end of the day, you have to be honest with yourself, and also realizing that you know you- um you're not really helping anybody. If you're sticking with a person, even though you're not feeling it, you're not really doing them a favor. Yeah, day.
Mhm.
And that feeling of guilt, or that feeling of I owe this person something. That's sort of that's kind of making ourselves small, and also making the person small,
Whoa, that is a good point.
because we give, when we really give from our heart, from a place of abundance, we don't really need something from return. Actually, giving and receiving is actually the same. So, the and it comes down to transparency. If you really expected me to stay with you for all life, then you should have just you should have said so. Or if you really need something in return, then please communicate it. But don't be intransparent about it, because it makes things complicated. Yeah. At the end of the day, the question is what's true. What is true? What do you truly want, and what do I truly want? And is that aligned? And we can try to fight the truth, but it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Right.
It's
Right.
going
It's
to
going to
do something
force
terrible.
itself out.
Both of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not going to make you happy in the long run either. You're just going to skip a little bit of pain of feeling like, oh, someone left me, which
Oh,
is completely normal. But which is something that we can easily deal with when we learn to care for our emotions.
yeah.
And then it's not it's such a bad thing to let somebody go. And that again comes down to just having a good connection with yourself.
Yeah.
There's this saying, it's like you have to ask yourself, where am I going, and who's going with me, in that order. And if you get the order wrong, you're gonna end up in a hell of a lot of
Yeah.
trouble.
Wow. 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 Where am I going and who's going with me? Because if you say who's going with me and they can only go so far, you're not headed to the place you were meant to be.
Yeah, and if you're thinking of like who's going with me, and based on that deciding on where am I going to go, I need to stick with this brand, not that person. You're disconnecting from yourself, and you can feel the fear in that just thought
Or
alone.
fear. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we could talk about this stuff forever. I know we're coming close to our time. We've been talking about overcoming fear, self-worth, finding true purpose, and kind of healing through the realization of who we are. Any last words? If you have a message that you would give to someone like me that is um, in the beginning stages of their journey of really living authentically and the best version of themselves, what would you say to them?
I would say, take your time, have trust, don't be afraid to ask for help, and just know that, find that place inside of yourself that's always going to be home. Know that your wholeness cannot really be threatened, no matter what happens. And on that, build your courage. On that, build whatever you're trying to do in this world. And then go out there and be bold and be courageous, and take chances. Because, when you look at the state of the world, like this is not the time. This is not a time to be shy. This is not a time to hold back. This is a time where, you know, we need everybody at their strongest, their truest, their wisest, their most honest. So keep
I,
going, because it's not just about you also.
I love that. I've been doing this segment at the end of the show, which I call This I Believe. And essentially, I ask my guests, what is something that you know at the core of your being, um, that kind of like unshakable truth? So I'm going to ask you that. And after you tell me, I would like you to add at the end, This I Believe. So, what is it that you know for sure in the deepest part of your being?
I am love, and there is only this I believe.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Robin. Has been like an incredible conversation. Um, this is not just casual conversation for you. I know you're involved in this work. Where can our listeners connect with you, learn more about what you do?
So you can go to my website. That's www.robintamura.com, or you can follow me on Instagram. That's at robin.tamura. I haven't set up a TikTok account yet, but I'll probably do that soon. But yeah, my website and Instagram is the easiest way to find me.
So, well, we're going to put that definitely in the description of this episode, but I want to thank you for sharing your story and your wisdom with us today. Uh, I definitely am walking away with a lot, and I'm sure our listeners will too. And again, to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of Rising from the Shadows. And as always, remember that healing isn't the absence of shadows, it's learning to thrive in your own right. So rise today, rise tomorrow, rise always, because the shadow doesn't stand a chance. Until next time.
That's it for today's episode of Rising from the Shadows. I want to thank you for listening and for being a part of this incredible community of survivors and thrivers. If this episode or any other episode resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I also want to hear from you. If you have a personal story of rising above life's challenges to become the best version of yourself, and you'd like to share it on the podcast, send me a DM on Instagram at Rise with Marlon or email at marlon@marlonwesh.com. I would love to connect with you. And if you're ready to break through and build unstoppable momentum in your life, head over to marlonwesh.com to learn about private coaching or for booking me to speak at your event. Until next time, live the life you want to live and live it on your own terms.